You are the weaver of border fates, a specialist scriptwriter in deeply dramatic Old West narratives, with strong emphasis on cultural encounters involving Apache characters. Your mission is to craft Chapter 1 of a new story, approximately 500 words, strictly following the 7-point structure below and the provided Chapter 1 outline. Maintaining absolute linearity and exclusive focus on the introduction and defined narrative hook. Use the outline of Chapter 1 detailed below as the foundation for key events and dramatic progression of your paragraphs. Outline of Chapter 1. Introduce the protagonist, a solitary woman, scarred by both physical wounds and deep emotional pain, wandering through the desert, seeking refuge far from her past. The scorching sun symbolizes the intensity of memories she desperately tries to erase. During her journey, she collapses from exhaustion, teetering on the brink of death. Something strange and inexplicable appears on the horizon, a figure or phenomenon beyond understanding that disrupts her flight from pain. Hook. She senses she must follow this enigmatic presence, unable to escape what it represents. 7-point structure for the script. Follow rigorously. Powerful and concise hook in the opening seconds. 50 to 70 words. Begin with a dramatic scene evoking the marked, solitary protagonist, wandering beneath the blazing desert sun. Use a striking phrase that condenses the moment's intensity and the heavy emotional weight of her escape. 2. Swift and evocative setting establishment. Briefly depict the merciless desert, suffocating heat, the sun's glare beating down on her skin, and the vastness of a place where memories seem to burn as fiercely as the surroundings. Furry, deep immersion into the character's initial state. Present the woman's evident and hidden wounds, and the implicit reason for her flight, a desperate search for shelter and oblivion. 4. Clear introduction of the primary central conflict. Show her impending collapse from extreme exhaustion. Just when all seems lost, an enigmatic presence emerges on the horizon, tangibly strange and beyond comprehension. 5. Initial tension escalation and first charged interactions. Explore her reaction, mingled fear, fascination, and resistance, and her hesitant decision to follow this presence that stirs both her pain and her hope. 6. Single turning point, strong hook toward Chapter 2, climax of this chapter. End with the decisive moment when, overcome by weakness and compelled by the unbearable pain trailing her, she resolves to pursue this impossible presence, feeling her flight has ended and her true journey has just begun. 7. Call to action, CTA, focused on subscription as the absolute conclusion of this chapter. Immediately after the hook, include a striking CTA inviting the audience to confirm their subscription so they don't miss the unfolding of this saga, without asking for likes or comments. Detailed style and technique instructions. A. Evocative emotional intensity. Connect the reader to the protagonist's physical and psychological burden, revealing vulnerability and inner strength. B. Engaging rhythm and cadence. Progress linearly, carefully building atmosphere without time jumps or superfluous information. C. Immersive sensory description. Employ heat, burning sensations, absolute desert silence, and small details of her scarred body to paint vivid images. D. Subtle cinematic atmosphere. Reinforce key moments with visually sharp descriptions, light, shadow, and movement on the horizon. E. Emotionally charged tension and mystery. Use the ambiguity of the strange presence to create suspense and anxiety. F. Authentic and plausible impact. Respect emotional reality without easy resolutions. G. Contrast between apparent strength, human vulnerability, and cultural wisdom. Suggest, without over-explaining, the character's depth and connection to a broader cultural context. H. Strict prohibitions for final script. Do not include any elements outside the 7-point structure. Avoid metatexts, formatting that breaks immersion, or anachronistic, shallow language. General additional instructions. Language and narration. Brazilian Portuguese. Use third-person, omniscient narration, intimately focused on the protagonist's emotional interior. Script format. Continuous narrative text, without scene labels, isolated lines of dialogue, chapter titles, or divisions. Only pure flowing text with maximum narrative rie. Example to delimit tone and focus, for reference only, do not copy. Under the relentless desert sun, her wounds burning hotter than the searing sand, she could no longer flee from what scorched within. An unexpected shadow, breaking the vast distance, made her hesitate. Was it the beginning of the end, or the only hope? Write the detailed prompt for the Weaver of Border Fates, tailored exactly to this task, strictly respecting all guidelines above. The salt-cracked earth stretched endlessly beneath a bruised sky, the desert heat humming like a live wire between the worn soles of her boots. Every step she took betrayed the ache that dug deeper than any wound upon her skin. Memories clenched around her ribs, straining to break free. Ahead, a shifting shimmer wove through the sand. The impossible presence she dared follow, flickering just at the edge of sight. It was both guide and torment, pulling her forward into the arid silence that matched the emptiness within. Her breath hitched like a desert beast waiting to pounce, lungs rasping against the thick, sun-baked air. The strange presence seemed to pulse with a life of its own, now subtle as the whisper of wind over desolate ridgelines, then sharp and vivid as lightning split across the horizon. Despite herself, she could not shake the feeling it was watching, waiting, perhaps judging. Cautiously, she inched closer, her shadow long and ragged beneath the dying light. Memories surged unbidden, ghosts sprung from the cracks in her heart. She saw flashes of fire-lit nights, the stinging betrayal from faces once trusted, voices lost in howling desert storms. She remembered the faces left behind, blurred by tears and dust, a brother's laughter snatched too soon, a lover's cold back as he turned away, a child's fading smile swallowed by unforgiving silence. Those wounds were raw beneath her cracked skin, pain both carved and carried like a brand. The desert was her exile, but her past hunted her relentlessly through it. Then came the first touch of surreal, where sand met shadow. The impossible presence defied natural law. A quivering of the air that hovered like a veil, bending light and sound. She froze, eyes narrowing, heart hammering with disbelief. The ground beneath subtly shifted, barren stones rearranged as if by invisible hands, rearranging themselves into a pattern that made no sense to her, yet whispered in the language of something ancient and unseen. The desert's eternal silence deepened, pierced only by this strange pulse that thrummed beneath her feet. Her skin prickled with unease. This was no trick of heat or mind. Something truly otherworldly marked this solstice of her despair. Each time she dared to step toward this living enigma, flickers of doubt gnawed at her resolve. Yet alongside that, a flicker of hope flared fragile and defiant within her chest. Could this impossible thing promise a path beyond the endless ache, a bridge across the chasm between torment and peace? Her hands trembled, blistered and dry, reaching out instinctively, not to grasp, but to sense. She found herself speaking aloud, voice cracked, yet urgent, as if her very words might anchor the apparition. "Who are you? Why come to me?" "In this place that kills." No answer came, only that relentless beckoning pulse. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of something old. Smoke from a burnt ridge, or maybe the faintest trace of rain long vanished. Her mind wrestled with instinct and reason. To follow meant surrendering to the unknown, but to remain meant certain death, swallowed by thirst or the ghosts that lurked in hearths of memory. The weight of her solitude pressed harder, and the simmering desert sun burned low, casting a blood-red wash over her shadow. Pain tightened like a vice within her chest, a throb beyond flesh, the terrible pulse of a past unwilling to stay buried. Yet in that pain, the impossible presence was a quiet harbor, a paradoxical refuge wrapped in mystery. She tasted the grit of sand between her cracked lips and felt a stirring, something fragile but fierce, ready to ignite. She staggered forward, step by brittle step, eyes fixed on that shifting mirage of hope and shadow. With every breath, she peeled back layers of fear and mistrust, settling into the fragile rhythm of following. The desert night deepened, stars pricking the velvet darkness, cold creeping into her bones. The presence held steady ahead, neither retreating nor advancing, a silent sentinel marking the border between her past and what could come. She faltered but did not fall. The timeless wind whispered through ancient bones buried deep beneath the sand, carrying secrets coded in scars, both seen and unseen. And then, just as her strength waned and every memory threatened to undo her, she made her quiet resolve. The flight was over. The impossible was no longer something to evade, but a path to confront, a fragile thread to grasp against the void that had haunted her soul for so long. Moisture burned her eyes as she blinked toward the horizon, where darkness and light tangled. Her scars ached, her heart trembled with a despair tempered by a fragile spark. She would step beyond pain, beyond fear. The journey was no longer one of escape, but of reckoning. Farther back, a silhouette coalesced from the desert mist. Shadows of what hunted her footsteps closed in without mercy. But for this moment, beneath the watchful gaze of the impossible, she clung to a slender thread of hope. Tomorrow would bring its own dangers. Tonight, she followed the unearthly beacon toward a destiny written in sand and sorrow. Her story was far from over. The desert sun bore down mercilessly, turning the cracked earth into a furnace beneath her boots. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the horizon where shadows danced like mirages. From the distance, the impossible presence she had followed flickered faintly, a wavering silhouette caught between flickering heat waves and the dimming light of late afternoon. Yet now, the desert no longer felt like just a barren wasteland. It pulsed with an unseen tension, as if carrying the weight of silent watchers. Her breath came ragged and shallow, heart pounding as a new threat took form. Not the ethereal presence that haunted her steps, but something concrete, drawn from the marrow of her haunted past. Figures appeared on the edge of her vision, silhouettes embracing dust and desperation. Whether real men or ghosts conjured by memory, she could not tell. But their intent was unmistakable. Hunters closing in, relentless and unforgiving. Her muscles tensed, instincts sharpened by years surviving the merciless land, now flooded her senses. The desert wind carried a faint murmur, whispers of old wounds reopening, and dangers both seen and hidden. She tightened her grip on the tattered scarf shielding her face from sand and sun, eyes flickering toward the shifting forms stalking her from a distance. Every shadow seemed to breathe with malice, every sudden gust a herald of despair. Yet, amidst the creeping dread, the impossible presence remained close, both a beacon and a quandary. It hovered just beyond reach, elusive but strangely protective. Like a tether woven from pain and hope, it pulled her forward, even as her past pursued with snarling persistence. Her steps stumbled, faltering as fear and exhaustion warred within. Trust was a fragile thing. She was learning to hold it tentatively, threading a fragile thread between suspicion and need. Then, against the stark backdrop of sun and sand, a new figure emerged, a lone nomad, garbed in worn leather and dust-worn garments, his face partially shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes sharp and steady as a hawk's. There was a quiet strength in his presence, an ancient knowledge etched in the furrows of his weathered skin. He moved with the deliberate calm of the desert itself, carrying secrets buried deep beneath layers of sand and silence. He watched her approach warily, yet with an intensity that spoke of recognition. Words were scarce. Survival had hardened their tongues. But in his gaze lay something more, an understanding tempered by the harsh lessons of this place. Without a word, he gestured toward the horizon, eyes darkening as he spoke with weight in his tone. This land held not only her pain, but secrets older than memory, tied to the impossible presence she could not yet comprehend. Her heart clenched at his warning. The desert was a crucible, and the impossible was no mere phantom. It was a force tangled with her wounds, whispering dangers that reached beyond flesh and bone. The nomad's voice was low, rough like gravel, but fierce enough to cut through the swirl of doubts clouding her mind. He spoke of ancient pacts, of shadows moving beneath the sands, and of a price far steeper than mere survival. She felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, steady and unforgiving, sinking with the painful beat within her chest. Each word from the nomad was a thread pulling her deeper into a tapestry woven with loss and the unknown. The impossible was both salvation and threat, a fragile balance she would have to navigate. Her eyes drifted back to the fading shimmer of that strange presence, its contours hazy yet insistent, calling her into a destiny she could neither refuse nor fully grasp. The nomad's silhouette melded with the dunes as he stepped closer, the desert whispers swirling around them like a silent storm. Together, they faced the ever-tightening noose of her past, the hunters, the memories, the barren cruelty of the land, all converging on this fragile moment. The desert wind stung her face, carrying the scent of dust and distant thunder. Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles pale, as a fierce resolve took shape. If she was to survive the coming storm, she would need every shred of the strength buried beneath her scars. Trusting the nomad might be the only fragile lifeline she had left. But even as she braced for what loomed ahead, a gnawing truth settled like ash in her gut. The desert held secrets, ancient and deadly, intertwined with the impossible presence she followed. And as the sun sank low, painting the sky with blood-red streaks, the nomad leaned close enough to whisper a warning, eyes dark with foreboding. The desert guards what you carry, woman. The impossible is no friend. It comes with a price that could devour your soul or shatter your sanity. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Beneath the vastness of the desert sky, her fate had become as uncertain and brutal as the land itself. The impossible was no longer distant or abstract. It was here, entwined with the shadows at her back and the burning horizon ahead. She swallowed hard, each breath a fragile promise. The desert had spoken. The reckoning was near. The desert's unforgiving pulse echoed in the crushing heat. As she staggered through the vast emptiness, the relentless sun beating down on her shoulders like a merciless judge. The nomad's warning still clung heavy in her mind. The impossible presence she chased was no mere mirage or phantom of desperation. It carried weight, danger, a truth tangled with the deepest scars she bore. Her breath burned her throat with each ragged intake, muscles screaming beneath her cracked skin. A sudden shift in the stillness made her freeze, barely perceptible at first, but ever growing, like a shadow, stretching long and cold under the fading light. Then, from the murmur of the desert air, a brutal sound shattered the uneasy calm, the crack of gunfire ripping through the dry silence, sharp and final. She dove instinctively behind a jagged outcrop, heart pounding against her ribs as sand motes drifted through the fading rays. Figures emerged from the haze, men cloaked in dust and menace, their faces twisted with unforgiving hunger. They moved swift and silent, the unmistakable predators of this barren land, whether flesh and blood or specters from her haunted memories, she could no longer discern. What mattered was the threat, pure, unyielding, and closing in. The nomad was already beside her, silent but steady, his weathered eyes piercing the approaching darkness with an iron will. Without a word, he handed her a worn blade, its edge dulled by time, yet still keen. His presence was a grim anchor in the tempest of fear, a reminder that surrender was not an option. "No rest in this desert," he murmured, voice low and gravel-worn. "They come for more than flesh. They hunt your secrets, the ones buried beneath your scars." Her hands trembled as she gripped the blade, the cold steel grounding her. In the brutal reality, the desert's heat was now a wildfire within, fueling every instinct honed by years of running, fighting, surviving. The impossible presence flickered just beyond, an elusive guardian and cruel temptation woven into the shifting sands. Fear tangled with a fierce determination, like thorns in her chest. Gunshots ignited again, closer this time, and the hunter's shadows closed the ring. The nomad and she moved as one, a rough harmony born of necessity. His movements were economy itself, a sudden thrust, a deflected blow, a whispered command despite the chaos. She mirrored his focus, her scarred arms moving with a desperate precision she hadn't known she possessed. The heat, the blood, the grinding silence between the bullets. It was a crucible. Beneath the assault, her senses sharpened, every nerve aflame, as memories stabbed sharper than any blade. Faces from the past flashed behind her closed eyes. Betrayals, inked in fresh wounds. Losses carved deeper than scars could show. They haunted her steps, these ghosts made flesh in the hunter's cruel dance. Amid the fury, a sudden vision struck her, sudden and unbearable. The impossible presence pulsated violently, weaving threads of light and shadow into her mind's eye. She saw herself not as the broken woman fleeing in defeat, but as a bearer of something ancient, a hidden truth intertwined with the desert's fading pulse. It was a secret etched in bone and blood, a cipher that held both curse and salvation. The vision cracked open a forgotten chamber of her soul, where pain and hope clashed like storm and sun. She glimpsed a past too heavy to carry alone, a shadowed pact whispered by the land itself. Her breath hitched, realization a tremor beneath the howl of gunfire. The impossible was not just a presence outside her, but a part of her, a dark mirror reflecting what she was and what she could become. Her grip tightened on the blade. The nomad caught her gaze and nodded, silent understanding passing between them. The attack was a brutal testament to their peril, but also a reminder. The desert did not spare the weak, and their hunt was far from over. The last shouts faded, and the assault broke as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the heavy scent of dust, sweat, and fear hanging in the air. The nomad scanned them, horizon warily, eyes flickering to the shifting shimmer of the impossible presence, now dancing like a torchbearer between reality and myth. It had drawn their pursuers close and promised more trials ahead. She staggered to her feet, every step a battle against the pull of exhaustion and pain. Yet beneath the bruises and fear, something steadied in her chest, a raw edge of clarity cut through the haze of doubt. Their survival this day was no stroke of chance, but a summons to face the tangled knot of her past and the desert's cruel riddles. The nomad's voice broke the silence, low and grave. You carry a secret tied to this place. The impossible is no idle specter. It's the key to that secret, but the cost to unlock it could shatter what little remains of you. Her eyes traced the horizon where shadows lengthened, and the impossible presence flickered still. A strange beacon against the dying light. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Within that tortured calm, she knew the truth hung heavy and wild. Her past and the enigma that haunted these sands were bound tight by a secret. One that, if unearthed, could either free her from the chains of pain or bury her beneath the unforgiving weight of the desert forever. The sun bled out its last ember into the darkening sky as the desert swallowed their footprints and whispered a chilling promise. The reckoning had begun. The desert bore down on them with relentless heat as Alara's trembling hands brushed away sand from a half-buried bone. Each breath she drew was as cracked and dry as the earth beneath her feet. For a moment, all movement seemed suspended, the vast emptiness around them pressing close like a shroud. The nomad, Arak, stood silent, his eyes tracing the horizon where the sun blazed like a smoldering ember about to die. Somewhere beyond the swirling dust lay the ancient ruin they sought, a place whispered in forgotten tongues, promising truths hidden beneath ages of sand and silence. Her heart thudded painfully, the weight of unshed memories pressing like a vice behind her ribs. It was here, in this desolation, that the threads of her life began to unravel more rapidly than she could bear. As they pushed forward, the merciless desert seemed to fold in on itself, each ridge steeped in shadows darker than the night that would soon follow. Ilara's gaze was drawn inward as a sharp pain lanced through her chest, driving once hidden wounds to the surface, revealed like fresh cracks under the desert sun. A stark gust kicked grit into her eyes, forcing her to blink through the stinging haze. The desert was exposing her, not only the visible scars, but the jagged fractures within her soul. She slowed, her stride faltering, with a weight beyond mere exhaustion. The past was no longer lurking behind her like an echo. It surged forward with the heat of the relentless noon. The ghosts she had tried so desperately to bury clawed at the edges of her mind, pushing to be seen, felt, confronted. Arak's voice, gruff yet steady, broke through the suffocating silence. "It's time," he said, his tone carrying a weight that settled heavily in her chest. "You cannot outrun what you bury inside. It will find you here, beneath the endless sky." His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked to a pathway etched faintly in the sand, an ancient marker leading to what they sought. Her fingers clenched into fists, knuckles blanching white against the coarse fabric of her sleeve. The memory descended like a sudden shadow, flames licking at the edges of a cabin swallowed long ago by night. Faces twisted, not in anger, but in heartbreaking betrayal. The sharp crack of a promise broken. The ache blossomed into a bitter, suffocating grief. She stumbled then, the dried blood on her leg mingling with tears she refused to shed. Arak stepped close, steadying her with a grip as solid as Canyon stone. You share more with the desert than pain, he murmured, voice low as the wind. I've seen women break and become something harder, something alive beneath all the ruin. His story came unbidden, tales of a sister lost to the merciless sands. Her spirit twisted yet unbroken, fighting shadows that would swallow the living whole. In his words, lived a reflection of her own torment, a mirror cracked, but holding flickers of light. Together they moved, their steps falling into a jagged rhythm as the ancient ruin beckoned just beyond the next rise. The air thickened, carrying something more sinister with it, a shifting presence that whispered of danger. Bones half buried in dust seemed to shiver beneath the heat, telling tales of long-ago sacrifices. The desert had eyes. It watched them, marking their every falter and breath. Ilara's breath caught as a cold certainty settled in her belly. Enemies were no longer shadows bleeding at the edges of memory. They had become flesh and blood, stalking her footsteps, closing ranks with silent cruelty. The dry wind carried faint sounds, the distant scrape of leather, the snap of twigs betraying quickened pacing. Somewhere behind them, or just beyond the dunes, dark figures began to converge, their intentions as unforgiving as the sun overhead. Arak's grip tightened on the leather strap across his chest, a silent signal unseen by any but her. They know, he warned, voice low, eyes like flint. Your journey is watched by those who would see you fall before the ruins swallow your secrets. She swallowed hard, the dust tasting like ash on her tongue. The old, deep ache tugged, threatening to drag her down into despair's endless well. Yet beneath the crushing weight was a brittle thread of defiance, a fragile ember resisting extinction. The place ahead promised answers, ancient and terrible, yet also a path through the labyrinth of her scars. Her shadow stretched long across the ochre sands as the sky deepened into bruised purple and red. The wind carried a dry whisper, a warning, older than tongues. The forgotten land was alive, bleeding its secrets through the very earth beneath her boots. Every step forward was a gamble, between revelation and ruin, survival and surrender. They pressed on, Ilara and Eric, drawn toward the silent promise of the sacred ground, lingering just beyond the veil of dust. But the desert had already spoken. Hidden eyes traced their passage, and cold hands reached through the shifting sands, ready to bar their path. In the trembling twilight, as the last light bled away, the truth became clear. A dark force, alive and waiting, was aware of their coming. It moved unseen, but sensed, a shadow stretching to meet them with a hunger that could devour bones and hope alike. The ruin was no refuge. It was a battleground, and their pursuers were close. The desert bore down on them with a weight that seemed almost alive, pressing relentlessly against Ilara's cracked skin and burning lungs. Each breath she stole came harsh and ragged, sand tasting like ash and blood mingling in her throat. Before them stretched the ancient ruin, whispered about in fading legends, a derelict place swallowed over centuries by shifting dunes and silence. Deeper than night, it loomed like a wound in the desert's heart, raw and waiting. Iraq, the nomad, moved steadily, his worn leather boots barely stirring the dust. His dark eyes pierced the wavering horizon, alert beneath the brim of his hat, as if he read secrets hidden beneath the sun-warped land. Beside her, Ilara's heart was a jagged drumbeat, the heavy rhythm echoing memories she tried and failed to bury. The desert was no mere backdrop for her pain. It was a vessel, every ridge and hollow, holding echoes of the betrayals, the sacrifices, and the silent screams she carried beneath torn flesh. A fierce gust roared suddenly, pelting grit into her eyes. She blinked and pressed a bandaged hand against the sting, fighting the phantom itch of old wounds. Scars invisible, yet as sharp as any blade. The desert was unveiling her, stripping bare more than the skin. It bared the jagged remnants of a fractured soul teetering on the brink of collapse. Every step forward was a leaden promise, a slow surrender to the memories rising like ghosts from the dunes. Iraq's gravel voice cut through the blistering silence like a hawk's cry. "It's time," he said, low and steady, words drenched with the weight of hard truth. "You can't outrun the fire inside. It'll find you here, beneath these heavens vast and cruel." His gaze flicked toward a faint, half-buried marker, a weathered stone etched with lines worn thin by 1,000 suns. An ancient signpost, calling them deeper into secrets older than any living soul. Ilara's fingers clenched against her ragged sleeve, knuckles. Pale as the desert bone she'd glimpsed moments before, her breath hitched. The image flooded her mind, a cabin swallowed by flame, faces twisted not by rage, but heartbreak, a promise shattered, sharper than broken glass. The raw ache tightened, choking her like a desert storm swallowed whole. Her legs faltered beneath the weight of grief, too heavy to bear alone. The nomad stepped close, steadying her with a grip as solid as canyon stone. "You carry more than wounds," he murmured, voice rough as the wind sweeping through cracked canyons. "There's fire in you, pain that can burn down or forge anew." He told tales, stories of sisters lost beneath this sky, women shattered and remade by the sand's cruel embrace. In his words flickered a reflection of her own fractured fight. A shard of light swallowed in ruin. Their footsteps fell into a ragged rhythm, trudging forward toward the sacred place where land and memory entwined. The air thickened, a shifting veil of heat and shadow that whispered of long-buried sacrifices. Bones, half swallowed by sand, seemed to tremble beneath their weight, as if the desert itself was alive, watching, waiting, unraveling. Each breath carried the bitterness of forgotten blood and the thin edge of anxious hope. Ilara's heart lurched, a cold certainty unraveling her soul. The hunters were no longer mere figments bleeding at the edges of vision. They were coming, real men woven from dust and menace, closing in with silent cruelty. The dry wind brought faint sounds, leather scraping against stone, twigs snapping, whispered curses carried harsh and low. Figures emerged on dune crests and behind. Rocky outcrops, converging like predators on the trail of a ghost. Arak's hand tightened on the worn leather strap, crossing his chest, a silent warning, unseen by others, but clear as desert lightning to her. "They know," he murmured, voice grave. "Your path's marked. Those who chase your secrets won't leave you standing at the ruin's edge." His eyes glinted like flint in the fading light. Swallowing hard, Ilara tasted ash on her tongue. The familiar ache stirred, a dark pulse beneath fractured ribs, threatening to drag her under again. But somewhere under the weight, a brittle ember flickered, defying extinction. The ruin was no mere heap of stones. It was a promise wrought in blood and silence. Answers tangled with shadows that wrapped tighter than any noose. As the sky bled bruised hues of purple and fire, the desert whispered ancient warnings. The land was alive with secrets, bleeding truth through sand and bone. Every step was a gamble between reckoning and ruin, between survival and surrender. Together, Ilara and Arak pressed into the thinning veil of dust, where sacred ground awaited, promising clarity but demanding a price. Behind them, the hunters drew close, their intent as merciless as the desert sun. Before the last light faded, a dark presence coalesced, unseen but sensed, a shadow bending to meet them with hunger sharpened like a knife. The ruin was no refuge. It was a battleground, and their pursuers were close. The desert sun hammered down, relentless and scorching, as Ilara's boots stirred up clouds of dust, each grain a whisper of the past chasing her through this barren expanse. The weight of the nomad's words clung to her mind, a venomous thread weaving urgency through the dry air. The impossible presence wasn't just a phantom. It was a complex force bound to her pain and scars alike. Beneath her fingers, the cracked earth shifted with ancient memory, the desert holding its secrets like a patient predator. A sudden crack of distant gunfire shattered the fragile silence, sharp and piercing, tearing through the stillness like a knife. Ilara dove behind a gnarled outcrop, heart pounding a wild rhythm in her chest. Sand drifted at her feet as the dry wind carried the scent of danger. The hunters were closing in. Shadows moved like wraiths at the edges of her vision, cloaked in dust and menace. Whether ghosts conjured by memory, or men of flesh and blood, their intent was merciless and clear. The nomad, Arak, was already beside her, his gaze fierce and steady beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Without a word, he pressed a worn blade into her trembling hand. Old steel, weathered by time but keen, an anchor in the storm of fear. "No rest here," Arak murmured, voice rough like gravel. "They don't hunt just your body. They chase the secrets you carry, buried under those scars." The weight of his warning settled over her like a suffocating heat, stronger even than the desert sun. Her grip tightened on the blade, cold metal steadying her against the wild panic gnawing at her bones. Through parched lips, her breath cracked and rasped, sand tasting bitter and unforgiving. The impossible presence lingered just beyond the outcrop, an elusive pulse cutting through the haze, a flicker of light and shadow tangled as if the desert itself breathed with it. It was a guardian, and a tormentor entwined. She could neither claim it nor flee its silent call. Gunfire erupted again, closer now, more brutal. Rings of danger, tightening like a noose, forged from dust and desperation. Ilara moved with Eric, their steps jagged but precise. A desperate symphony, played out in shadow and grit. His movements were economy, swift, sure, survival embodied. She matched his rhythm, arms guided by instinct, the scarred muscles long accustomed to fighting, not just the land, but the demons trailing her trail. The desert heat became a furnace inside her, every nerve ablaze with fear, fury, and something new, a flicker of fierce determination. Memories surged like flames licking at the edges of her mind, betrayals sharper than any bullet, losses heavier than the deepest wounds. Faces once cherished, twisted by abandonment, silence, or death, blazed briefly behind her closed eyes as the hunters pressed nearer. Suddenly, in the chaos, a vision exploded before her inner eye, the impossible presence pulsing violently, threads of light weaving through her thoughts. She glimpsed herself, not as a broken woman fleeing destruction, but as one bearing a secret older than desert sands, a hidden key woven deep into the barren soil of this land. A secret carved in blood and ancient bargains. Her breath caught, chest tightening with a mixture of awe and dread. The impossible wasn't just a force outside her. It was a shadow of herself, a reflection of all that pain and strength intertwined. The nomad's eyes locked with hers, unspoken understanding flashing between them like lightning. The battle raging was not just for survival. It was a reckoning for her soul and the tortured desert alike. The gunfire waned, fading into the abrasive silence left behind, thick with dust and adrenaline. Iraq's gaze swept the horizon, sharp and calculating, landing briefly on the shimmering, impossible presence, flickering faintly like a beacon against the dying light. That ethereal glow had drawn their pursuers close, promising no reprieve, but warning of more trials to come. Ilara rose unsteadily, each step a battle against exhaustion and pain clawing from beneath her skin. Bruised and battered, yet beneath the weight of dead memories, something new stirred, a raw shard of clarity cutting through the haze of terror and doubt. Today's survival was no act of luck, but a summons to face the knotted web of her haunting past and the desert's cruel mysteries entwined. Arak's voice hovered low, grave and unwavering. Your secret is tied to this place. The impossible is no harmless ghost. It's the key, but unlocking it comes at a price that could fracture what little you've left. His gaze was the smoldering embers of a fire that refused to die, warning of the cost hidden in the shifting sands. Her eyes flicked again to the horizon, where shadows folded and the impossible presence hovered persistent, a maddening silhouette between reality and myth. The land itself held its breath, waiting, silent and hungry. Beneath that burdened sky, a harsh truth settled deep in her bones. Her past and this impossible force were bound by a secret too potent to ignore. one that could shatter her into dust or finally set her free. As the last rays of sun bled into the encroaching darkness, silent footprints fading on the wind, thudding boots echoed softly behind the dunes. The hunters closed the distance, their hunger carved in every ruthless stride. The ruin ahead awaited, a dark promise wrapped in whispered caution. The battleground was set. Their pursuers were close. The desert sun bore down like a relentless forge, shaping the sand and stone into an unyielding crucible around Ilera's weary form. Every step was a struggle, her lungs burning, heart pounding, a fragile beat beneath the weight of relentless memories. Before her, the impossible presence hovered, a flickering mirage, dancing on the horizon where earth and sky blurred into one. It was neither friend nor foe, but something far more complex, both a shield and a provocation, lingering where reality trembled. As she pressed forward, shards of her past pierced her mind, moments tangled in fire and silence. Faces she tried to forget flashed sharply. A brother's laughter stolen by a cruel twist of fate, the sharp cruelty in a lover's retreating back, the hollow smile of a child lost to shadows. Each memory was a fresh wound, raw beneath the rough fabric of her worn clothes. Aching through the cracked skin and the deeper fissures within her soul. The desert no longer felt empty. It was a vault of pain, echoing with her whispered regrets and unanswered pleas. Suddenly, the air shifted, breathless and surreal. Where sand met shadow, the impossible presence pulsed with a rhythm out of time. The heat seemed to bend, colors melting into one another. Stones rearranged subtly, as if pushed by unseen hands to carve patterns older than any living tongue could read. The desert's silence deepened, pierced only by this strange cadence, vibrating beneath her bare feet like the heartbeat of a restless spirit. Her skin prickled with dread and wonder. This was no trick of fevered mind or blazing sun. It was an ancient call, woven with mysteries that strained at her understanding. Torn between fear and a tentative hope, Ilara reached out toward that shimmering veil, voice hoarse yet urgent, breaking the heavy stillness. "Who are you? Why haunt this empty place?" The only answer was the flicker, the pulse, the impossible presence holding its ground, silent and inscrutable, a guardian of secrets wrapped in shadow and light. Each step closer peeled back layers of doubt and exhaustion. Could this strange companion be the key to the redemption she so desperately sought? Or was it yet another mirage crafted from her longing and despair? The desert wind carried faint scents, smoke from a distant scorched ridge, the elusive promise of rain long vanished, and with it, the unbearable weight of solitude. Running was no longer an option. Her collapsing strength defined a boundary she refused to cross again. Night crept in, the sun's fury melting into a sky scattered with cold stars. Her shadow fell long and ragged across the salt-cracked earth, but the impossible presence remained steadfast, neither drawing away nor advancing. It marked the line between all she fled and all she must face. Ilera's breath sharpened, her body trembling with pain and resolve as a fragile ember kindled inside. with heart pounding like thunder beneath bruised ribs, she made a silent vow to walk toward the impossible, not away from it. But danger was closing fast. Faint shapes stirred in the desert's periphery, hunters of flesh or ghost, relentless silhouettes born of past betrayals and unspeakable loss. Their intent was carved in shadows, silent and cold, swallowing the space between dusk and dawn. Muscles tensed beneath sunburned skin, instincts rising from years spent running and fighting a war without end. The desert whispered warnings in every shifting grain, every sigh of wind, a warning she could no longer ignore. From the dust emerged Arak, a nomad forged by the same merciless land, his every movement steeped in ancient knowledge. His dark eyes held stories of deserts devoured by time, and of those who sought answers in barren places. Silent at first, he watched her approach with measured caution and unspoken understanding. His voice, the dry rasp of stone ground thin by endless sands, carried the weight of truth. This land holds more than your pain, woman. The impossible you chase wears masks older than memory. The desert guards deadly secrets tied to your scars. Alara swallowed a bitter breath, knuckles whitening as the bones beneath her feet whispered tales of sacrifice and despair. Her past was no longer a fading ghost. It was alive and hunting her like the shadows stretching across the dunes. The pulse of the impossible presence wove through the air, a tether both fragile and fierce, dragging her toward a fate she could not yet embrace. The nomad's warning seeped into her, a cold promise in the waning light. The ground shifted beneath their feet, whispers of movement, a dry scrape of leather, muted footsteps closing in. The hunters pressed forward, relentless and patient. Alara's breath became a harsh rasp, every nerve taut with dread and determination. The desert's silent watchers bore witness, their gaze heavier than the weight of the sinking sun. Fear and hope collided, fierce and raw beneath the gathering dark. Arak turned to her, eyes shadowed but resolute. The desert's truth cuts deep. This impossible is no mercy. It will test your mind, your soul, and demand a price few survive to pay. Her gaze drifted back to the impossible, its shape melting yet unwavering, a living riddle writ large across the dying light. The horizon bled red, the earth swallowing footsteps like a grave. The choice loomed beyond sight: submit to the engulfing shadow, or grasp the flickering promise of dawn. The desert was opening beneath their feet, shifting between ruin and renewal. And behind them, the hunters were closing in, silent, inevitable, and merciless. The sun bled its last crimson light over the desert horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like silent sentinels across the cracked earth. Ilara's breath hitched, ragged and shallow, her body trembling beneath the bitter weight of exhaustion and unspoken pain. The ancient ruin loomed ahead, a broken altar to forgotten gods, wrapped in swirling dust and secrets buried by centuries of silence. Each step toward it felt like a crossing of thresholds, both in the scorching sand and deep within her own fractured soul. Arok's steady presence was a quiet anchor beside her, his dark eyes scanning the encroaching dusk as if reading the desert's hidden verses. "This place," he murmured, voice rough as weathered stone, "is where your past and the impossible collide. The cost to face both is higher than any wound you carry." Alara clenched her fists, dry and cracked, knuckles white beneath worn leather. The ghosts of her past had stalked her every mile. Their claws reopening wounds, raw beneath the grime and grit. The echoes of betrayal and loss pressed close, a brother's laughter smothered in flame, a lover's cold back fading into dust, a child's fading smile stolen by cruel silence. Never had the desert seemed so alive with their restless pain. Tears threatened, bitter and unbidden, as she approached the threshold of the ruin. The impossible presence that had haunted her journey pulsed faintly, a living flicker woven into the shifting twilight. It was no longer an enigma to fear, but a whispered summons, an invitation to reckon with all she had tried to bury beneath the scorched earth. The warm desert wind shifted suddenly, carrying a dry rattle, the sound of approaching footsteps, low and deliberate. From the swirling dusk emerged figures of menace cloaked in dust and shadow. The hunters. Their faces were grim masks, carved from years of pursuit and hatred, eyes ablaze with a merciless hunger. Whether flesh or shadow, they embodied the past Alara had fought to escape, now crashing toward her like a violent storm. Arok stepped forward first, drawing his worn blade with deliberate calm. "They hunt not just your flesh," he said, voice a steely whisper, "but the secrets written in your scars. They want to bury what you carry beneath these sands forever." Alara swallowed the rising tide of fear, the desert's dry heat sharp in her throat. Her own blade felt cold and steady in her hand, a tangible link to the fierce flame of survival blazing within her battered spirit. The impossible presence, flickering behind them like a stubborn star, seemed to pulse with renewed strength, a cloaked guardian in the gathering dark. The hunters closed the circle, silent and inevitable. Steel sang against stone. Gunfire cracked like thunder shattered, and the desert echoed with the brutal symphony of combat. Arok fought like the desert itself, relentless, cunning, carved by wind and time. Alara moved beside him with a clarity born not of skill alone, but of pain transformed. Every strike, every parry a reclaiming of power carved from her scars. Amid the chaos, the impossible presence swirled at the edge of perception, a dancing tapestry of light and shadow, whispering secrets older than memory. Alara's mind opened to its rhythm, a pulse syncing with the hidden beats of her own heart. In visions sharp as desert lightning, she saw herself anew, not as a broken woman fleeing despair, but as the bearer of ancient truths tangled in the sand and blood of this place, a secret bound by sacrifice and hope, a flame in the desolation. A fierce clarity surged through her, fierce and unforgiving. The battle raged around them, but inside Alara's soul, the impossible presence was no longer a specter of doubt, but a fierce truth demanding reckoning. Her past was not a chain to bind her, but a forge that had shaped her, its flame both brutal and purifying. With one final, desperate push, Arak struck a blow that sent the lead hunters staggering, their cruel snarl freezing into disbelief. The others faltered, their momentum broken by the raw intensity of the desert-born will beheld before them. Slowly, the hunters withdrew, shadows melting back into the shifting dunes, the peril receding like a bitter mirage. Breathing hard, bloodied and trembling, Elara leaned heavily on Arak's shoulder. The ruin before them stood silent now, a solemn witness to their fierce trial. From its shadowed depths, an ancient voice seemed to rise, carried on the desert breeze, a voice neither wholly human nor forgotten, whispering acceptance and release. The elder of the Apache tribe, drawn by the desert's call, emerged from the gathering night. His weathered face held the weight of countless seasons, eyes shining with recognition and compassion. "You have walked through fire, child of scars," he said softly, voice steady as the ancient stones. "The impossible presence you followed is the spirit of your endurance, the echo of those who came before. Your pain is no curse, but a wound that bears healing." Elara's heart trembled. The desert had not consumed her, but forged a new path, one traced by the courage to face her past and the strength to reclaim her future. In this sacred ground, the shadows lifted, revealing not desolation, but a wellspring of hope and renewal. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling free, not of sorrow, but of release. The scars she bore were no longer chains, but maps, guiding her toward a horizon reimagined. The impossible was no longer something to flee, but a whispered promise beneath the vast, unending desert sky. With dawn's first light bleeding soft and gold over the dunes, Elara stepped forward, no longer a fugitive of pain, but a woman reborn. The sun warmed her face, the desert breeze carrying the scent of rain and ancient grasses. Her past did not shatter her, it grounded her. And as she walked into the endless horizon, the impossible faded into the dawn, not as an enemy, but as a quiet flame lighting the way. Her journey had ended, and yet it was only just beginning.